Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Fireside Chats. And while cryptocurrencies may only be in their relative infancy, it's critical to speak to players in the space who've been there from as close to the beginning as we can get, and remember how it all began and what are the core tenets that underpin the cryptosphere. Ron Gross got into Bitcoin space all the way back in 2011, spreading the word of Bitcoin as an ardent evangelist. Ron co-founded the Israeli Bitcoin Association and was the executive director of the Mastercoin Foundation, the world's first ICO. Today, Ron is here to join us for this Fireside Chat. Ron, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. All right, so to kick things off, let's get current. Let's get current with what's happening in the world right now. Now, I understand that you've set up a meetup for people interested in Libra here in Israel. What can you tell us about that project?
Yeah, so one of the activists here in Israel, Sharon Scheinberg, he actually noticed the opportunity that Libra was launching. And he quickly set up a Facebook group, and also other people set up the meetup group, and then just like a bunch of us gathered and realized there is demand to talk about this, to discuss this topic, even also on Facebook and on online platforms, but also on a real event. So we already did the first event. I think it was the second meetup in Israel. There was a smaller meetup in somewhere in the south, but we did a very large meetup. About 150 or 200 people came last week. Just a brief introduction into the topic, because of course not that much is known at this point. But we're planning out also other events in the future, maybe a larger conference, but this hasn't been finalized yet.
Do you think that this Libra announcement and the opportunities sort of presented with the Libra project offer a change in the way that the space is communicating, working with its sense of community? I mean, in establishing a group like this, do you feel that there's any difference in the energy between what's happening now with Libra and what's been happening for the last few years, let's say, for example?
Well, it feels a bit like a rejuvenation in some point, because sometimes the Bitcoin comes and goes in waves, the energy. Like always there's a quiet time or the crypto winter for a while, then some new project or new development comes in, and I think Libra is an important step. The involvement of Facebook and other large corporations in this is basically a signal to governments that the space cannot be ignored. Now, I'm not saying Libra is the future or not. We can touch on that later, but it certainly it means that the space cannot be ignored.
Certainly so, but I want to ask, I mean, you touch on that sense of community, the waves that have happened. Certainly anyone in the sphere, whether they be called waves, roller coasters, whatever it might be, there's certainly that sense of ebb and flow. But as someone who's been in the space since very early on, the beginning we could say, do you feel that sense of community is growing, or as we get closer and closer to a sense of mass adoption, is perhaps the cryptosphere losing a bit of that early community base that perhaps it felt when it was still a very niche product?
I guess it's less of a tight-knit group, a guerrilla sort of environment where everybody knows everybody. Now the space is just too big, and like a lot of people just don't, like, I don't know, they don't know the older projects or the older players in the field. And then just the space is a bit divided. All the different cryptocurrencies and different projects. In the past, there was just Bitcoin, so people. And it was all very new, and this filled like an entire all the space. And now every new project attracts its own following, and there is some internet connection and communication between the different teams, but it's also a bit fragmented.
Yeah, so that fragmentation does seem to be visible, certainly when you look on crypto social media. You see, the XRP advocates, the Bitcoin supremacists.
Yeah, and I think it's some of that is because. People coming into the space, let's say in the last few years, they look. First they hear of Bitcoin, of course. They look at the price. They see it at 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000. They see it's too high, quote unquote, and then they look on other projects that seem to them more attractive because the price is lower, because they're newer. So that's, I think, that the way that these newcomers think of the space, and I think that it's a wrong way to look at things, right? Because first, Bitcoin, for it to succeed, at the very beginning, I think that the first comment on Satoshi's original post on Bitcoin was somebody mentioning that it might go up to $1 million or $10 million a piece, right? So we're still not in the end game of Bitcoin. Even these prices are low. compared to what could be.
Certainly. And in order to get to those sort of stages and develop the crypto sphere into a wider audience, I suppose, that ecosystem that's necessary to build any financial structure, any financial and asset class that needs to be built. As someone who himself has been part of many early projects and the Mastercoin Foundation project and or these other projects you've been affiliated with over the last 8 or so years, what state would you say the overall ecosystem is when it comes to crypto? Is it still really emerging, or do you think there's a sense of cohesion, of direction coming out in terms of themes you're seeing in the crypto sphere as a whole?
Well, I think it's just a matter of the bigger bodies, bigger companies and governments finally starting to move in the right direction. Like we're seeing a few local governments in the U.S., Ohio, and a few other states accepting Bitcoin as tax payments. We're seeing that these larger corporations go in, and banks are very interested, not just in blockchain technology, but also in how they can use Bitcoin or how they can offer Bitcoin to their clients. So overall, if you look at the world, especially in other places like US or Switzerland or Korea, Japan, so some places are very advanced, and we didn't think, like back when I started, we didn't think it would come so fast. Like, and it's not starting today. We're seeing these bodies being more and more interested in crypto maybe over the last 5 years or so.
Certainly, and I want to touch on that point you just raised in terms of how you started. I mean, now it's sort of understandable why people get into crypto. I mean, even from a speculative perspective, there's a lot going on in the space. There's a lot of money flowing into the space. But back in 2011, when you invested, that certainly wasn't the case. What got you to buy your first Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think I was. It's a combination of luck and having the right background, I guess. I come from a computer science background. I have a second degree in computer science with knowledge of cryptography and distributed systems. So when I saw the announcement, not the actual announcement, I saw a post about it on Slashdot, and I immediately read the white paper. Now the Bitcoin white paper, unlike the white papers that we're seeing these days, is very solid, compact, and technical. And technical in the good way. I mean, it really explains how to build the innovation in the right way. So I read the white paper. I saw that technically it's very feasible, and not just feasible. It was a working system, and I realized there were also social forces that could make this viral, basically. So of course I didn't invest everything I had. I said this. I saw that it could be under some potential future. It could enlarge its reach and reach the masses. So I just put something in it. It was a risky investment, but I didn't. I invested for the long run. When it doubled or quadrupled, my mom kept telling me to sell and get my original investment back, but I wouldn't listen.
May I ask, what was the price back when you were first buying?
When I first bought it was 80 cents a piece.
Wow, there's going to be a lot of people upset hearing that number, but I guess 2011 you've got to be being those pioneers, and I suppose that's a different factor there. I mean, again, talking about those waves of community back in the early days, we talk about the cypherpunks, the anarcho-capitalists. Those are the first waves of people who, similar to your own story, and maybe you even categorize yourself in one of those identities, but people who wanted to really believe in the technology or to just break away from the mainstream system. Mm-hmm. A lot of those voices, some say, have been, if not silenced, at least diminished in the current sphere when there's bigger players coming in. And as more institutional players come in, perhaps their voices will be diminished even more. What do you think are the sort of key voices driving the crypto space at the moment?
So I think you're right that the early days really had more of these idealistic types, and I do count myself somewhere in that sphere as well. But if people say that now that the banks and corporations are moving in, and that's sort of, some people see that as sort of a failure, I see that as a success, because it was obvious from day one for me that for Bitcoin to really succeed, it needs to incorporate everybody, right? Not just the fringe, the anarcho-capitalist groups, but it aims to be a financial system that everybody can play in, and eventually for people out here on the street. I don't really think that most of the world will own their private keys and their seed phrase, and they would need somebody else, some recognized, regulated financial institute to hold their Bitcoins for them. So I see that trend as positive.
And talking about the banking sector and those sort of big institutions, would you say that the relationship between cryptos and the banking sector is adversarial? Do you think it's now becoming more of a partnership? And do you think there's been an evolution since the time you got into the space until now?
I think crypto enables a lot of competition that the banking sector didn't have. It's not going to eliminate it, but the smart movers in the space, the banks that are willing and that are actively aiming to cooperate with the Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies will succeed. But I do see a lot of slack. It's really it's a pain even today how to make international wire transfers. You need to pay all these fees and to wait a few days or a week for a transfer. Where in Bitcoin you can send $1 million by you wait 10 minutes or for a few blocks. So there's this act of cooperation and competition. It's neither, it's not just one of these.
And do you think that in all this, Bitcoin will retain its primacy in terms of the crypto sphere going into the future?
Well, I do believe so, and I put your money where your mouth is, right? So I'm mostly holding Bitcoin, a little bit of other coins for diversity, but I do mostly hold the Bitcoin, and I think that's really the network effect and the prime mover, and Bitcoin technologically can be what it aims to be, right? There are all these new developments always I'm not even following, keeping track of all the new developments, but a lot of with the Lightning Network that's been going on for the last few years. So yeah, Bitcoin has what it takes, and it's the only crypto that is really that has limited supply in a way that other cryptos also may have limited supply, but when you have 1,000 of these or 1 million of these, right? So the whole set of cryptos doesn't have a limited supply, but Bitcoin being the first does.
Right. There's that sort of separate, distinct from the rest of the pack, I suppose.
Yeah. And branding-wise, I guess.
Certainly, and bringing that full circle, so you don't see Libra as a potential threat to Bitcoin. Should it go ahead? Obviously, I mean, regulatory elements depending, but should it go ahead as sort of envisioned, I suppose, in the Libra white paper? Do you think it potentially represents a threat to Bitcoin?
I don't see it as a threat, actually. I do think it's really interesting. I think that it could gain some traction and maybe become, I don't know if the world currency, but it gets some, maybe top some of the national currencies. But it's still, ultimately, it still is under the influence of governments. And they can still print money as they wish, or in this case, it's corporations that are going to manage it. It's still somebody else who will manage the currency, and that's something that Bitcoin does fundamentally different, and in a better way, I think.
Certainly, it has a lot of advocates and distinctions that will say, bring it up or tear it down. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But before we go, I can't let you out of the chair without asking the question, come the end of 2019, we've had a lot of volatility so far this year. Do you have a prediction as to where you think the price of Bitcoin might be, say the end of this year?
I don't really, I don't have a prophet. I'm not a prophet. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't think it's going to go much down, let's say.
Okay. Generally optimistic on the air. You think we're headed to continue this bull run into the rest of the year?
Yeah, and I think that if we cross the previous record of 20,000, so it's probably going to go even above that if it reaches that peak again.
Threshold. All right, well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I want to thank you, Ron Gross, for being here with us at BLOCKTV. And please stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information in the crypto sphere. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.